Hi friends, welcome to my channel. This is Megan from Modern Moon Quilt Studio, and in today's video I'm going to show you how to make this really cute quilted tote bag. Let's get started. Now I'm making this quilted tote bag for my toddler who has turned into quite the bookworm, and ever since the weather's gotten cooler we've been spending a lot more time at the library and he loves to carry his books back from the library to the car. So I am starting with 2 quilt blocks that I made using the Book Nook quilt pattern from Pen and Paper Patterns, and I'm going to start by measuring each quilt block. So I want each of these quilted panels to measure about 14 by 14 inches. So I'm going to cut some fabric and add this background fabric to the top, bottom, and both sides of each block before I quilt it. Now you don't have to start with traditionally pieced quilt blocks like I have here. If you want, you can just start with a whole piece of fabric and quilt that up and it'll be just as cute. Now let's briefly talk about dimensions. So I said that I was making this tote bag on the slightly smaller side. Now I'm starting with quilted panels that are about 14 inches by 14 inches square. The finished tote bag is about 11.5 inches tall by 12.5 inches wide. So you're going to lose about 2.5 inches in height and about 1.5 inches in width. And part of that is because the bottom of the bag we're making into boxed corners, so it sits flat. So take that into consideration. A standard tote bag measures about 15 inches tall by 13 inches wide with a 14-inch handle height, which means you're going to want to start with a quilted panel that's at least 17.5 inches tall by 14.5 inches wide. So now that I have my quilt blocks sized to the correct size by adding just a little bit of fabric to the top, bottom, and sides of the block, we're going to go ahead and quilt this up. Now to do that, we are just going to create a couple little mini quilt sandwiches, and I would suggest using a backing fabric that you have outgrown and aren't going to use for another project. I'm going to use this cherry fabric that's been in my stash for a while and I don't have any plans to use it anytime soon. The reason for that is these tote bags are actually going to have a lining on the inside, so you're not going to see the back of this quilting. And another great tip here is to use up your excess batting by just franken-stitching some pieces together. And to do that, you just butt up the raw edges of the batting and go over it with a zigzag stitch. Now go ahead and baste these quilt sandwiches however you prefer. You can see here that I'm using a basting spray, and then go ahead and quilt them up with whatever design you like. This would be a great opportunity to practice some free motion quilting or some new technique you want to try. I'm going to go ahead and just do some diagonal line quilting. I think it's just a classic and easy way to quilt up these really small projects like this. Once our front and back panels are quilted up, we need to trim and square these. So go ahead and trim off that excess batting and backing fabric, and also take this opportunity to make sure that both panels are measuring at the same size. Next, we need to cut the fabric that we're going to use for the lining of these tote bags. So all you're going to do is cut 2 solid pieces of fabric that are the same size as the panels that you just quilted. If you're making a standard size tote bag, you're going to want yours to be about 17.5 by 14.5 inches. Next, we need to make the straps for the tote bag. So to do this, you're going to need either 1 fabric or 2 coordinating fabrics. I'm using 2 fabrics, so I have a different color on the inside of the strap versus the outside of the strap. Now, a standard tote bag has about a 14-inch handle height. So these pieces of fabric, you're going to want to cut at least 29 inches long and about 1 3/4 inches wide. And you're going to want 4 pieces of fabric, 2 for each strap. One common method of making straps with these 2 pieces of fabric is to sew them together to make a complete tube and then turn the tube right side out. But I'm going to be honest, I don't like that method. I find it really difficult to get the tube turned right side out without completely destroying my seams. So I'm going to show you how I do it. So I take both pieces of fabric, again 2 coordinating pieces, and I sew them together right sides together along one side of the long seam. Once I have the 2 pieces of fabric sewn together along the one long edge, I then go ahead and fold it together, wrong sides together, and press it along the seam that you just sewn. Then take the 2 remaining raw edges of fabric and fold it over about 1/4 inch and give it a good press. Once you have the 2 raw edges folded and pressed, then sew along the edge about 1/8 inch from the edge to close up that entire tube. Then go ahead and do the same thing along the edge that you already sewed to just finish off the strap. And go ahead and repeat that entire process to finish 2 straps. At this point, you should have 2 straps, 2 pieces of lining fabric, and 2 quilted panels. Now that we have all these pieces, we're ready to assemble this tote bag. The first thing we need to do to get this tote bag assembled is to sew together the lining pieces. To do this, place both pieces of fabric right sides together and using a 1/4 inch seam allowance, sew down both sides of the lining and the bottom. But make sure you're leaving a large gap at the very bottom. I would suggest about 5 to 6 inches wide. The reason you need this gap is to turn the entire bag right side out once you've finished assembling it. And make sure that you're using a back stitch at the beginning and the end of this gap to make sure you're not pulling any seams apart as you're turning the bag right side out. Once you've sewn the two lining pieces together, go ahead and press all the seams open, including the bottom seam, which includes that opening, and that's going to make closing that opening at the final step much easier. Next, we need to sew together the quilted panels of our tote bag. To do that, place them right sides together, making sure that they're oriented in the right position. Then, using a 1/4 inch seam allowance, sew around 3 sides of the panels, both sides and the bottom. Just make sure you're leaving the top open. Now we need to attach our handles. Now to do this, I would suggest measuring from the outside edge of the tote bag just to make sure that the handle is centered on the bag and also that both handles are positioned in the same place on both sides of the tote bag. So for this tote, I'm measuring about 3.5 inches from the outside of the tote, and then I'm going to pin the handles into place before sewing. Now this is where it can get a little bit confusing. So what you want to do is pin the strap to the outside of the tote bag, so the right side of the quilted panel. And the side of the strap that you want facing outward needs to be pinned right side together with the right side of the quilt block. So you can see here that I want the stripes to be showing on the outside and I want the green fabric on the inside. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side, making sure that it's positioned in the same spot. I'm going to measure 3.5 inches in from each side and pin the second strap into place. Next, we need to get the lining pinned into place. To do that, turn the lining right side out and tuck the lining inside of the quilted panels. Then you're going to line up the raw edges of the lining with the raw edges of the quilted panels and pin it into place, taking care to line up the left and right seams. Once you have the lining pinned into place, you're going to sew all the way around the top edge of that tote bag, 1/4 inch from the top. If you have any type of slide-on sewing table or extension table to your sewing machine, I would suggest removing that so then you can tuck the tote bag over the sewing arm and then rotate it around as you go. The last thing we're going to do before we turn this tote bag right side out is to create some boxed corners. Now you don't have to do this. At this point you can turn the whole bag right side out and close up that opening in the lining and you're good to go. But if you want to do some boxed corners, here's how you do that. Take the bottom corner of the tote bag and open up the corner and fold it so that the seams are lined up with each other on the front and the back. The corner of that tote bag should still make about 90 degrees. You're going to press everything nice and flat and then mark a line perpendicular to the seam about 3 inches wide. You can make this box a little bit more narrow or wider depending on how you want your tote bag, but I feel like 3 inches is a pretty good size for a boxed tote bag. And to mark this, you can use just a good old ballpoint pen. This is going to be on the inside of the tote bag, so you're not going to see any of these markings. If you want, you can put a pin in here just to hold everything into place while you take it to the sewing machine, and then you're going to just sew right on that line, making sure to backstitch at the beginning and the end. Once you have that corner sewn down, you can go ahead and remove that corner by cutting about 1/4 inch from the seam. And then go ahead and repeat that entire process with all 4 corners. So both bottom corners of the quilted panels and both bottom corners of the lining. And now comes the fun part. We get to turn this entire bag right side out by pulling the quilted panels through the opening that you left in the lining. Go slowly and be gentle with those seams to make sure you're not pulling the seam apart as you push everything through that opening. Once you have your tote bag turned right side out, use a point turner to gently poke those corners all the way out. The very last thing you need to do is close this opening that you left at the bottom of the lining. Now this is where you're going to find that pressing those seams ahead of time is going to help this. So go ahead and make sure that those raw edges are folded inside so that you can't see them. You can clip or pin this closed. And then using the smallest seam allowance possible, sew a top stitch to close that opening. I try to keep mine somewhere between 1/8 and 1/16 of an inch. To give this tote bag a nice finished look, Go ahead and push that lining into the inside of the tote bag and then stitch around the very top edge of the tote bag about 1/8 of an inch from the top. This is going to help the lining and the quilted outside lay nice and flat. And there you have it. There's our finished quilted tote bag that's perfect for library trips, shopping at the farmer's market, or quick grocery store runs. I will make sure to link all of the products I used in the description below. If you have any questions, just drop a comment below. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel for more quilting and sewing tutorials like this. Thanks for watching and have a great day.